Hello, everyone, and good evening. Welcome to the February 2023 Biketivist Forum. Thanks for making it this Wednesday evening. While folks are still trickling in, let's start off with what does equity mean to you? So if you can just put in the chat, what is your definition of equity, or when anyone says the word equity, what comes to your mind? Start putting your thoughts in the chat, and I'll just quickly give a brief background about why we're here. Since the fall of 2017, SVBC has been working to make our commitment to equity and social justice central to our organization and to all our work. And we've taken this on as a big challenge, overcoming a long legacy of inequities which are there in the bike movement and in biking in general. Our work in solidarity with the community will make it possible for us to make transportation, our land use systems, our surroundings more equitable. And as these systems become more and more equitable, our communities and our bike movement, the reason why we are all here, will become more stronger. SVBC adopted a diversity, equity, inclusion plan back in 2018, and it lists down various goals and ways we want to measure progress. And it has some community goals, which I'd like to share today because they are in alignment with the Biketivist Forum, which we have for tonight. So the first goal is build a culturally humble community of members and volunteers who reflect diverse communities and strengthen our community accountability. Goal 2 is integrate cultural humility and social justice values and an inclusive definition of bicycling into our work. And goal 3 is work in solidarity with systematically excluded communities and social justice organizations to build community power around bike advocacy and other shared interests. Keeping these goals in mind, let's jump into our forum tonight. I'd like to introduce you all to our moderator, Belen Sierra. I hope I said that right. Okay. Belen is the Equity and Belonging Manager at the County of San Mateo. She uses she, her pronouns, and in her spare time, loves spending time with her kids at the park. Off to you, Belen.
Thank you. Welcome, everyone. I'm so excited to be here. I've been following the organization for a long time, even in my role as a community health planner with the San Mateo County Health Department, where we supported the Silicon Valley Bicycle Coalition in the journey into equity and make it the organization more equitable. And now in this new role, I'm excited to be, I'm the Equity and Belonging Manager for the county. So we are celebrating today this coming together to learn what we mean by equity, especially in the mobility field, and then what we can do to keep operationalizing equity in our organization. So the two presenters that we are going to hear today that will introduce themselves, Yesenia and Champ, shortly, they're going to be providing us with their experience and some tools that they're using on how we can bring communities, impacted communities, or what we call equity communities, into decision-making processes. But I want us to go beyond that and start thinking about building communities of belonging. And what we mean by that is this idea of, and Yesenia will go into deep, into defining what we mean by equity and racial equity. But for this idea of community of belonging, this idea that people have a sense of agency in those decisions that are important to their life. And what we mean by that in institutions like I work in San Mateo County or other organizations that have been primarily run by dominant cultures is that sometimes inviting people to the table might not be enough. Is allowing people to create their own tables, to bring their own solutions with their own needs in order to bring achieve this equity that we will, we set as a goal. So I want to keep that lens as we go through these presentations, because we are seeing the increased polarization in our communities. We see increased segregation in the Bay Area. We have worse segregation than we had in the 70s, according to the Haas Institute. And that is our equity work is very urgent in order to bring people to this believing and sensing that they know and they belong to these communities. So I will let Yesenia and Champ introduce themselves, and then they're going to go into their presentations, and we will have a Q&A at the end of 25 minutes or so. So you can start writing your reflections or questions as they do the presentations on the chat, and we can pick some of those questions in the Q&A. But we will go through 8 minutes to 10 minutes of presentations each. So Yesenia, do you want to go first and introduce yourself, and then Champ?
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Yesenia Perez. I go by she, her pronouns. I'm the Climate Equity Program Manager at the Greenlining Institute, which is based in Oakland, California. And my work there primarily focuses on climate resilience and clean mobility policy. I'm also from the Bay Area. I currently live in San Francisco, so just super excited to be working on issues and with people close to home.
Thank you. Champ?
Yes, hello. My name is Champ. He, him is my pronouns. I am the founder of the original Scrubber Bike team based in Oakland, California. We are currently an after-school program that teaches kids bike safety, bike mechanics, and bike customization. We take kids on bike rides throughout Oakland and take them out to different events to showcase off bikes of art that they make, the works of art that they make.
Thank you. So Yesenia, if you want to start sharing your screen. You're muted.
Yeah, just pulling up my screen right now. Give me one moment. Okay, can everyone see that?
Yes.
Okay, so again, my name is Yesenia Perez, and I'm the Climate Equity Program Manager at the Greenlining Institute. Greenlining is a research and public policy nonprofit that has been advocating for racial equity and economic opportunity. And again, we're based out of Oakland, California, primarily working in California, but now working in different states throughout the United States. And our work is necessary because of racist policies like the practice of redlining, which marked off communities of color as hazardous to investments, which made it extremely difficult for those residents to access loans, buy homes, and open businesses. But the legacy of redlining and systematic disinvestment have consequences for communities of color that we really still hold true today.
Yesenia, I'm going to interrupt you a little bit. Is there a chance to make the slides bigger? People are asking that it's a little small.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
That's much better.
Is that better? Okay. Okay, great. Yeah, so when we look at the conditions of redline communities, even looking at this map from 1937 to the most recent map in May 2021, we see that the neighborhoods that were affected by redlining decades ago are still the ones that suffer first and worst from the effects of climate change, living closer to highways and other polluting industries, lacking access to affordable and reliable internet, and disproportionately suffering from COVID-19 most recently. And I want to start off by defining racial equity. Greenlining defines racial equity as transforming the behaviors, institutions, and systems that disproportionately harm oppressed groups of people. I really liked some of the answers in the chat. I saw no barriers as an answer for what equity means. And Greenlining defines equity as a means, a solutions, that's tailored to meet the various needs of different groups of people. Equity is focused really on the process of what it takes to get there and ensuring that communities are empowered to drive the decision-making process and solutions, and again, like make their own table. It's ultimately about increasing access to power, redistributing resources, eliminating barriers to opportunity, and empowering marginalized communities to thrive and reach their full potential. And so thinking about equity from this power building and community ownership perspective, Greenlining developed the Mobility Equity Framework. And the Mobility Equity Framework is a tool that offers planners and community advocates a step-by-step guide to create a more community-centered transportation system and mobility system that focuses on the mobility needs of communities like biking and puts affected communities at the center of decision-making. And we hope that this tool can be utilized in your own advocacy work. But before I dive into an example based out of San Francisco that used the Mobility Equity Framework, I wanted to outline some of the problems that this framework aims to solve. Problem 1, past and present injustices. We know that low-income people of color suffer disproportionately from unhealthy, unsafe, and unreliable transportation options that often don't meet their needs. A Harvard study found that the person's commute time is the single greatest factor in their chance of escaping poverty. That's more than crime rates or school test scores. Transportation is not just about moving people from A to B, it's about people moving up the economic ladder and giving them a better quality of life. And studies have also shown us that Black, Latino, and multiracial people suffer from higher rates of pedestrian fatalities than white people. And these disparities are a result of segregation, historic disinvestment, and redlining, and a lack of decision-making at the table. Problem 2, lack of community engagement and power sharing. Our traditional transportation planning and decision-making process generally doesn't center low-income folks of color and can even exclude them. Access to power plays a big role in the story of today and continues to reinforce these structural and institutional racial injustices. And when we talk about equity, we also have to talk about fair representation. Just imagine how different our transportation system might look if women and people of color and people with disabilities were accurately represented in these decision-making spaces. For example, the poorer neighborhood is, the less likely it is to have safe sidewalks and lighting. And that's because people are able to actively advocate for themselves. And that's a result of who is at the decision-making table and which citizens have the time, ability, access, and the privilege to show up at public meetings and advocate for their own needs and navigate that public participation process. And next, we'll take a closer look at the framework, which allows communities to be at the center of decision-making when it comes to their own mobility. So returning to the Mobility Equity Framework, it's our 3-step tool for maximizing equity and community engagement in transportation planning and decision-making. It focuses on the mobility needs of communities and people from an equity perspective rather than a car-centric infrastructure. And so right now, I'll walk you through 3 steps of the framework using an example from Bayview Hunters Point community in San Francisco. And just to give you a little bit of background on District 10 in San Francisco, it's a really diverse community that's home to the highest concentration of Black residents and also contains many immigrant communities, including Asian, Pacific Islanders, and Latinos. And a significant number of these residents are low income and are renters, meaning that they're at risk for displacement in a really unaffordable housing market. It's also really difficult for folks to get around, and there are fewer reliable public transit options. And this community also suffers from health issues as a result of being situated next to highways and industrial pollution sources. And yet, despite this, there's a strong and resilient network of residents who have a history of activism and community organizing in response to the many burdens that this community faces. In 2018, the County of San Francisco Transportation Authority hired an equity consultant who then utilized the Mobility Equity Framework to improve transportation planning in District 10. They began with step 1, a community needs assessment. Step 1 begins with identifying the community's most pressing mobility needs. And what's crucial about the needs assessment is designing it in a way that facilitates a dialogue rather than driving the dialogue or solutions in a specific direction. It's crucial to engage folks that lack the time or means to attend public meetings and ensure that their feedback and mobility priorities are accurately represented. For this San Francisco, this meant rather than just jumping straight in, they first partnered with community leaders to understand how to make this community engagement process more accessible and relevant to low-income residents. The result was a co-design process where initial workshops where over 150 residents attended and were paid to brainstorm and co-design over 90 ideas about what equitable transportation looked like and meant in their community. Step 2 is an equity analysis that assessed and compared the equity outcomes of the mobility project proposals. In San Francisco, the 90 project ideas previously brainstormed during the community needs assessment were put through an equity analysis that were designed to reflect the values and needs of their community. The main takeaways here are that the process by which we arrive at selecting the appropriate equity indicators and metrics is so important, and the communities must be deeply involved. The final step of this process is community decision-making and ensuring that the community has the final say on deciding which mobility services to fund and deploy. In this final step of the framework, once the community has seen how various modes scored on their equity analysis, the community decides through a democratic vote which mobility options to fund and deploy. In District 10, through a democratic vote, the community decided to implement 10 equitable mobility options to meet their needs, which included ideas such as a community shuttle to the grocery store and a subsidized carpool service to bring kids to school. And this process can help determine which mobility strategies are the most equitable for your community and your geographic context. The point is this framework is supposed to be flexible and adaptable, and a tool to prioritize equity and community engagement across many different forms of transportation and mobility planning and decision-making. And putting equity into practice will help us achieve a vision for the kind of clean mobility future that we want. And utilizing an equity framework and approach is what will ultimately make our mobility future and our communities stronger and more resilient. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Yesenia. Next, we have Champ Stevenson. Champ, do you have his slides or are you gonna?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for allowing me this time. Give me a second to connect my charger so I don't cut off in the midst of me talking. All right. And I will also pull up my screen. All right. Are you there with me?
Yeah, we're here.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So here we have.
So Champ, oh, there it is. So we see, can you make it a little bigger, the presentation?
Yes, I can.
Oh,
Is
perfect.
this working?
Yes. Thank you.
All right. So thank you. Working with folks like the Greenlining and understanding the lack of investments that happens in communities of color. The Department of Transportation in the city of Oakland also adopted an equity plan to invest more into communities of color, starting with they called it 1,000-mile repaving plan, master paving plan. And so within a master paving plan, the city of Oakland and Department of Transportation was bringing up-to-date paving on streets that needed it the most. And so one of those streets was 90th Ave. That's one of the communities, the neighborhoods that I was born and raised in. And yeah, and so they were planning to put a bike lane and do a whole lot of repaving without, really confirming or talking to folks in the community. And so we made that change. And so working with the city of Oakland, DOT, to create the East Oakland paving plan, which we looked at the corridor between Bancroft and International. We located all of the schools, the churches, the transit connections on both Bancroft and International. And we also wanted to make sure that it was convenient for folks on going back and forth between the schools with the changes that we are making. So these were the conditions before the repavement. We brought this all up to the Department of Transportation and let them know how it was unsafe. As you can see, it's really hard for, as you see here, drivers have difficulty seeing pedestrians, poor pavement quality, and as you see, there's no bike lanes to connect between Bancroft and International. And so this is the plans that we drew up for the planners. We wanted to make sure that we had protective billards. This middle lane, the medium refuge, allows pedestrians to cross in the two phases. And then also in the purple, we wanted to make it a bike lane, a community bike lane, because that's how the original Scarborough Bike Team ride, typically in the street for clear visibility. All right. Our project goals was to calm the traffic, to make the corridors more delightful and vibrant. We wanted to improve on the traffic safety for the kids and the seniors going back and forth across the streets. 4-lane streets was really dangerous. We worked with the residents and the stakeholders to understand the vision of the community. It's coming from the DOT. So a little bit about the Scarborough Bike Team is that we empower urban youth, is our mission, living in underserved communities through self-expression and creativity. We encourage youth entrepreneurship and promote healthy, sustainable living for all. Scarborough Bike Team will use each work of bicycle art to impact social justice and global change. And so also a little bit about this bike ride, working with Ford Go Bikes when it was Ford Go Bikes. It was all about bringing transportation equity to our community, looking into bigger city or more so downtown area, there's more bike infrastructure. We lack that in communities of color. And so in that process, we made sure that we voiced our needs to the city, Department of Transportation, and the city planners. And they did their due diligence to go into a lot of the community gatherings that was happening. Uh, we also did a Paint the Town project that was also part of bringing awareness to this project. And the design, it was for the culture. So, thinking again with the equity lens, we wanted to make sure that all changes was not going towards increased gentrification. Because folks that live in that community, in our community, want to make sure that the changes are for us and that we're going to reap the benefits. And so we put out a flyer that went out to the community. We went door to door, Scarborough Bike Team, and we got petitions from all the neighbors. And everybody loved the idea. They were aware of the culture. They're aware of our nonprofit. And so they signed on to the project. And this was what we were pretty much presenting to them. So here's a little information. You can contact me on Twitter or Instagram, Scribble Bike Team. We're also nonprofit, so always collecting, looking for donations, grant opportunities, possible chairperson, board members. So you can follow us there. You can also find more about the project at the Oakland website. And so at the end, this is just a picture, a photo of the installation. So the city of Oakland had Public Works, actually hands and knees, really doing the work. It was made by the community for the community, and actually one of my cousins was a part of installing the mile and a half stretch of Scraper Bike Way, is what we call it. And if I could have 2 moments, I'd like to show you guys a quick rap video about biking in East Oakland. Uh-oh. Sorry, we're having some technical difficulties here.
Baby champ. We ride Skittles, Oreos, Mambas, Pringles, whatever snacks we eating on, we bringing them. Ice cream, paint jobs, Starburst inside. Give me a break. Kit Kat on the flip side. I'm the Scraper Bike King. What do you mean we get hungry? Switch to teams. Got whips that you ain't even seen. Now everybody wanna join the Scraper Bike Team because they know we go. Everybody sitting on phones, selling don'ts on sixes for the low. If y'all ready to mob, then let's go. Whoa, two-tone dope, red and black. Coca-Cola be the theme and the can in the back. I switched it up and came right back. And if my tire get low, I get some Dixie flat. Sliding, driving, what are you mobbing? Kissing for our cars as we profiling. We the Scraper Bike Team and we stay mobbing. Kissing for our cars as we profiling. Sliding, driving, what are you mobbing? Kissing for our cars as we profiling. We the Scraper Bike Team and we stay mobbing. Kissing for our cars as we profiling. We keep it lit, foot heel the strip. You were moving down the way while something needs you from the kiss. We back at it again. House past 10, bike slapping, gang, guess we mobbing. Hit a right on band ball, fletching all the tucker ball. Elbow in the air while we slapping that brick wall. Two-tone paint, white on white with the glow. Dipped and soft, little player, I'm a walk up on the Scraper Bike Team. Snacks me the beans, root beer float, two-tone brown with the cream. Boston baked beans, flame on your rings. When 5-0 come, I take a ticket for the team. Continue moving mean in the hood, going green, baby champion. The Scraper Bikes is on the scene. When 5-0 come, I take a ticket for the team. Continue moving mean in the hood, going green. Sliding, driving, what are you mobbing? Kissing for our cars as we profiling. We the Scraper Bike Team and we stay mobbing. Kissing for our cars as we profiling. Sliding, driving, what are you mobbing? Kissing for our cars as we profiling. We the Scraper Bike Team. And we stay mobbing. Kissing for cars as we profiling. Sliding, driving, what are you mobbing? Scraper Bike Team, man, we stay mobbing. Kissing for cars as we profiling. Scraper Bike Team, man, we stay mobbing. Kissing for cars as we profiling.
Thank you, Champ. We have a very active chat that I'm going to start bringing up some questions, and some of them are directed to you, Champ, as far as clarifying the project, right? So do you, like Betsy, it's like, do you know how over many years the 1,000-mile repaving plan took place? Is that the, that's for the Oakland DOT, but do you have any sense, Champ, of like how long? Like, I'm sure they're still in the process of completing.
Yeah, absolutely. I believe the paving plan was a 5-year plan.
Yeah.
And so they started in 2018. So we're still getting there. There's still streets being paved to this day.
And then the middle lane, is that a two-way bikeway down in the middle, the one that they designed on 90th?
Yes, it is. It is a two-way bike lane. It is a community bike lane.
Nice.
It's never been done anywhere in America. And so there, in order for us to get it done, we had to kind of rename it and such, and design it in a way that it reflects the community versus just a designated bike lane. But we had a lot of pushback from Oakland Police Department. They wanted, there was moments where they would park in the middle of the lane, while a group of us are trying to ride bikes. And so, yeah, to this day, we made a big deal about it, working with, of course, city, Department of Transportation, and mayor's office. And so now they no longer park in that lane. So that was a big, big celebration.
So it says, could you elaborate on what was involved in the Paint the Town event?
Yeah, so the Paint the Town event is a City of Oakland project where they go into different neighborhoods and pretty much pitch an idea to do a community painting. So the city would shut down, give us permits to shut down the intersection. And we'll work with a partnered nonprofit. We worked with Walk Oakland, Bike Oakland on a project on purchasing. The city purchased all of the paints and all of the good stuff that we needed for that day. And I brought in one of my good mural designers, my mural artist, and yeah, we did it a whole day. It took us one day to do.
Wonderful. They were just asking about our biking. So how many miles a year we ride a bike? Personally, Deborah, my cargo bike where I carry my 8-year-old, my 2-year-old got stolen in March of last year. And since then I have not been able, but other than that, I've been riding bikes every day. What about you, Champ?
Right now, my 3-wheel bike is out of commission as far as the music goes. And it weighs almost 200 pounds-ish. So, lugging that with no music coming out of it. It's been a while. Me and the team were trying to get the bike back rolling by summertime this year. But I do have other bikes. I was just out biking today, actually. We have worked with the after school program at 3 different elementary schools. And on Wednesdays, we do the enrichment program where we teach kids about making the bikes, bike safety, and bike customization. And I built the curriculum, and I'm still tweaking it and editing it and making it perfection so we can eventually franchise to different cities and teach in different schools, 4th and 5th grade students how to make bikes, scraper bikes.
Good. Yesenia?
Yeah, maybe like twice a month. I want to do it more often, but there's a really good ride that starts in Golden Gate Park and goes to Ocean Beach, and that's about like 14 miles.
Good. So going back to some questions that we, I know that it's like almost 5:40. And what we started discussing is around this idea of engaging communities, impacted communities into decision making. So how do you find champions of communities of color, impacted communities, to be at the table or to set their own tables? How do you go about identifying trusted messengers?
It's all about, for me, being a kid from East Oakland, not really having the college experience of, knowing how to do the planning. So it was just all about, knowing folks, making sure that I'm inside the right spaces with the right people. And sometimes, yeah, I would just see different posts on, Facebook. And I'm like, okay, well, they're having a meeting about this. Well, here I come, because I'm about to come talk my mess, because, we need more investment into our community. And, especially during the time, it was just a lot of talk about a mega crematorium coming into our neighborhood, where it burns 3,000 something bodies, and it's like, okay, what about the air quality in our neighborhoods? We already have the streets, the freeway 880 going through our neighborhoods. So yeah, it was just all about going to these different community events and being present and networking with different nonprofits.
Yesenia, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, I think just building off the idea of just being present and showing up. It's not just about, you want to involve community-based organizations and finding people who are already doing similar work or even different work is really important, but you don't always want to just approach community organizations with an ask. You want to make sure you're already having these conversations, listening to what their priorities are, and not just always trying to push your own agenda, but really focusing on building that, authentic, real relationship.
What is your take on paying communities to participate? This is an issue that, as a government agency, we are looking for ways to, if we invite people that impacted communities, to identify ways that we can compensate for their time. What have been your experience with compensation to get people to the table?
Well, in my previous experience, I worked with the county of San Francisco, and we have that project specifically was for education, and we asked parents to show up to these meetings, which were at 7 p.m. at night, and we provided gift cards. But I also think in terms of payment and incentives can look a lot different, and that can be money, that can be gift cards, that can be providing child care. And I think it really is important to provide something so you're not just extracting and taking from the community, you're also making sure they're paid for their time, because their time is just as valuable as ours.
Thank you. Yeah, I believe the city of Oakland received some different funding for different things around transportation. And again, just being in the right place, right circles, I just already knew which buttons to push on, which propositions we need to get funding from in order to implement. I was all about implementation, making sure that, not only myself, but my team is being paid for the time being taken out, of their day to go out and petition and go door knocking and, advocating and going into these different spaces to speak again about what our needs are, what our priorities are for our community, and to remain humble throughout that whole process. But just letting them know, y'all owe us.
Wonderful. So for Yesenia, what have been kind of the biggest challenges that you're hearing from organizations that are using the toolkit? some of the key opportunities or the aha moments that they had had.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest challenges like really stems from funding and what the funding sources are, because often we see that like funding for transportation or mobility is very siloed and it's very specific to transportation or mobility projects. And it's fantastic to get that community-driven plan funded. But it's also really important that we're not looking at transportation and mobility as like this siloed issue when we know it's such an intersectional issue that has to do with housing, that has to do with public schooling. And so I think that leads to like this more piecemeal, like fragmented approach and like piecemeal solution that's not as effective as it could be if we were looking at like the community needs as a whole instead of just like one separate issue at a time. And I think the opportunities then there really lie in just like thinking about how we can connect all these different efforts and projects, and ultimately not have them like siloed into these piecemeal approaches.
So, Champ, this is for you mainly, but Yesenia, you might have seen examples. We're talking about equity and belonging, right? Sometimes we have the best intentions. We go to communities, we identify, we try to bring people to the table. But if folks don't feel that ownership, that sense of agency, that sense of belonging, it's hard to engage them in a very authentic way, right? And I love what you're doing with your art, right? It's like you're starting from a place of culture, right? You're starting from a place where people are familiar and comfortable with, and there's pride involved in that. Can you talk a little bit more about that experience of how you're bridging this idea of equity with culture to create this, more equitable and belonging communities?
Absolutely, thank you. And I almost have a tear about to drop because it wasn't easy at all. There was a lot of accountability, that had to be held on pretty much the directors of the DOT, Department of Transportation, because in the process, we created this whole plan. It was going to be funded with, X amount of dollars from, I forget which pot of funds the city had for projects specific for this. But the funding somehow didn't come through with the painting of the center lane. So they repaved everything. They striped it for one lane going each direction, and that was it. And a couple weeks go by, a month go by, and I'm like, okay, when are you gonna finish the project? And so there was this whole discrepancy of, oh, well, we didn't have the funding for it. It was gonna cost this amount of money and this, that. And so I'm just like, I don't care how much it's gonna cost. Get it done, or you're gonna have 1,000 children in the community on each, on the doorstep. Because Oakland is big for protesting. We protest about everything, unfortunately, but fortunately. So yeah, it was definitely, and I was also hearing back from the community, like, when are they going to put this center lane? When are they going to paint it orange? And what's going on? And so I'm like, what? I don't know. Let me do some investigating. Let me figure it out. And so yeah, there was definitely a lot of accountability when it came to that, and it got done. It got done during the pandemic, in the midst of the pandemic. So we really wasn't able to do a huge celebration as we would have. But yeah, that answers the question. I'm sorry.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I think we have few questions around this idea of like dealing with different stakeholders. So you mentioned about the police also being some pushback there. But also we have a question about non-cycling motorists, right? It's like car-centered people. How have you, dealt with those, that level of opposition that tend to be, very loud voices?
Um, I mean, again, Scraper Bike Team, this organization has been around for quite a long time in Oakland. And so there's always been a level of respect and honor just around the Scraper Bike name and image. And I'm just like extremely honored, want to make sure that that legacy is continued, in the city and the neighbors honor that. So when it came down to like the police being parked in the middle of the street, or even neighbors blocking the street, they stay there for so long before they leave, or if they see a group of us coming, they clear the way. They make us the priority because, it's just honor. It's just out of honor. Honor, yeah. That's really all I can say about that.
No. So as volunteers, we have a group of volunteers from Silicon Valley Bicycle Coalition here. What would be kind of like your recommendations as they engage in this work to ensure that, underrepresented communities, impacted communities are brought to the table into the planning processes, for someone that might not have been done this work? Where will be kind of your, where to start?
I mean, you gotta start at a space where they're looking for volunteers. Um, Folks are always looking for volunteers for different events. Folks are looking for volunteers to just do stuff around the organization. Uh, yeah, you have to go in and show, your value, show that you want to help. You're there you're there with caring, intentions, not with intentions on adding more work onto someone's plate. It's like we're all in this together. Let's figure it out as we go, because it's a learning process for everyone. This is unprecedented space that we're working, operating in now. So how do we, come in softly, is just, being on the ground, work your way in, find organizations that's already doing the work and align yourselves, with great folks.
Yesenia?
Yeah, I mean, I think the only thing I would really add there is like, you're building relationships and that takes time. And I also think there's a question in the chat I saw earlier about what is one of the biggest blind spots. And I think that is that it's going to take time. It doesn't happen overnight. It doesn't even happen, in a year. And I think like what's really important to that is, how are you following up when you're volunteering and how are you maintaining these relationships? And I think just like establishing that communication is so important. Yeah, and like Champ said, not just going in to try to, do your own thing, but see what's going on in the community and how you can actually be a volunteer in these other efforts, and how that ultimately aligns with, whatever you're doing as a volunteer. And then I also think that representation really matters, and making sure that the communities that you're, that maybe you are representing the communities that you're joining. And I think like, being able to host engagements that are in multilingual and translated materials, all these things really, really matter.
So as far as some of Champ, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to also add that we need more planners of color to do some of this work from that perspective. So that's it.
Meaning from the government side too, like the representation on both on the nonprofit organizations, but government agencies. But, if you have to leave, some sort of advice for the folks that we all make mistakes. And I said, it's like in this equity journey is we are all journeying together, and we learn by making mistakes as well. But in your experience personally, Yesenia, you have a broad picture of, different case studies and organizations. What have been kind of the, mistakes that organizations do with the best intention that might, play, play against the intended goal? So organizations like Silicon Valley Bicycle Coalition don't go into that route. They can adjust. So you mentioned some of the tools. It's like, identifying trusted messengers, multilingual communication. But have you seen a pattern of, organizations trying to do the right thing and then, not getting the right results?
I think it's like less of a pattern and more of mistakes that, everyone is going to make, because equity is a process. It never ends. There's not one box that you check off and say, oh, I've done, we did equity. It's a really ongoing process. And I think to stay true to that, you have to be humble and recognize that, the best intentions might have been there when planning in the process. But maybe that wasn't implemented in the way that you thought it was going to be, and it looked a lot different. I think being able to step back is really important, and just let community lead in their own solutions and decision making is really important. And I think with that being said, just establishing like transparency, accountability, and communication from the very beginning and throughout the process is really important when we're talking about equity.
Anything to add as far as, maybe some mistakes that you've seen in your own work, or orgs that have done, when trying to engage with impacted communities?
Not really, because I feel like during the moment there was such a focus on equity and getting things done, and I'm a tough cookie to crack, and so when it comes into planning and implementing, I was all about implementing, because we can have the planning and go for planning for 10, 15, 20 years without anything being implemented. So yeah, it was just, getting things done, let's get shit done, let's implement it so we can start to enjoy the work that we desire, that we deserve. But yeah, it was a pretty smooth, it was a really, there was some hiccups, of course, but it was a pretty smooth process, and accountability, it went a long way.
Wonderful. So I know
folks accountable.
Good. So I like Yesenia that you said there is being humble, right? Time for reflection and self-awareness of, how we are showing up in communities, especially impacted communities. So I appreciate that. It's a good thing for all of us in the work that we can take as a learning. So I know, Sonia, we are at time for the Q&A. I just want to make sure we have time for the wrap up. I want to thank the Champ and Yesenia for coming today and share the toolkit and the experience. Champ, I can't wait to go and ride on 90th and experience it. I'm going to check it out when I go to the East Bay.
Thank you so much, Belen, and thank you, Champ and Yesenia, for joining us. I think it was really nice learning about all the work you do, and we can maybe start thinking about how we can put that into what all the local teams at SVBC does with their work. So there is one thing for all of you here who are attending. Can you think of one thing from the learnings from Champ, Yesenia, and Belen that your team can work on in the coming year? Or maybe can you think of champions from the communities of color whom you can build relationships with And if you can't think of a specific person, can you think of a strategy of finding that person? So before you break into your breakout rooms, would you mind putting any of those thoughts or anything that you learned from today in the chat? And while people put things in the chat, any closing remarks from you all before we let go?